Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a review of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. A little bit of a different review on my channel. I generally review fantasy sci-fi classics, but at the start of this year, I just come off the back of reading the Age of Madness trilogy and I really needed something a little bit different outside of fantasy, outside of sci-fi, because I had huge book hangover from that series. And so I needed something a little bit different. I've heard a lot about 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because in 2020, it had a lot of hype on BookTube and Bookstagram. Everybody was loving it and I'd heard of it, but I didn't really think anything of it because at that time I was really into my fantasy. And so with this much needed break from the fantasy genre, I thought, what could I read? Didn't really want to read a contemporary romance. I didn't really want to read a classic. And so I came across 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. As I was looking through my Goodreads list, and I thought, you know what? Let's give that a go. I also asked some of my friends whether they had read it, and turned out Angela, who I've talked about many times on my channel, has read it and she loved it. It was one of her favorite books of 2020. I think it was her favorite book of 2020. And I thought, you know what? If Angela loves it, let's see. I trust her opinions. And so I went ahead and I picked it up. This has to be one of the best surprises of this year so far for me. I mean, I know it's only January. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really solid story. I think the way that it read beautifully. It read very quickly. I got through it in like 2 or 3 days. And that was during work. So the fact that I was able to read it in 2 or 3 days during work was pretty impressive. Because normally a standard size book between like 300 to kind of 500 pages takes me about a week to read through. I was just pleasantly surprised. The story at a very, very high level. You are following kind of main 2 characters. You are following Monique. She's a journalist and she's a writer. The second character you are following is Evelyn Hugo, the title character. She is telling her story to this journalist retrospectively, and you are getting memories of her journey from starting out in essentially the movie industry. She doesn't have any connections when she first starts out. She comes from a very troubling background, a very fraught family background. She's a very motivated and ambitious young woman, and you're charting her journey from that ambitious young woman to essentially a Hollywood starlet. She becomes the center of attention. Lots of press and paparazzi are following her. Every single moment of her life, like every big moment of her life, is documented publicly. And she's such a wonderful character to follow. I'm just going to go into my review, and her character is such an interesting character. It's a very relatable character for me. She is a woman who has hustle. She works hard. That I can always respect. She's also willing to do whatever she can, which is where her character and my own personality and my own character diverge. I have pretty hard lines on what I am willing to do and what I'm not willing to do to get to where I want to get to. Whereas Evelyn, she's willing to do whatever she can and whatever she wants. And I can also respect that to an extent. She's a woman who makes me question my own boundaries, not in a negative or a positive way. She just throws these really interesting questions out about what you're willing to give up about yourself in order to get to a destination that you think you want. And at what cost are you willing to do that? And that's what Evelyn is to me. She's this very kind of confusing dilemma of, I can't help but respect her. I can't help but feel like she's a soldier and a warrior and she gets what she wants. But then I'm also like, I don't know. You're pushing it to heights that I don't know if I'm entirely comfortable with. But I can respect that inherent drive that she has is what pushes her forward. And I love that in my female characters. I love it when women, young women, older women present themselves in a way where they know that they are at a disadvantage. She's at a disadvantage for other reasons as well, because she is of South American heritage. One of the first things she has to do when she first enters Hollywood is change her name. They want to remove her South American heritage because that's not American enough. We still see that today. We still see that in present day. I mean, this is set in like the 50s, 60s and 70s, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, I will add in a correction. The fact that she as a woman was suffering through those things back then, and we still see women suffering through this today. I mean, some of the stuff that she suffers through, I have definitely experienced. And it hits home. It really, really hits home. Showing it in an industry that is not really known to many people. I mean, lots of people watch movies and shows, but they don't really know much about what goes on in Hollywood and what goes into that process of making a film. So showing that in a world that is kind of so foreign to so many of us, but then doing that with a character that doesn't feel foreign. She just feels like most women do who have an ounce of ambition. It's really smart. I think it's really intelligent because there's this mystique around it, but then having this character who to the reader is not mysterious in any way. The other thing that I really like about Evelyn's character, and this just goes on to the broader thematic work of the book, is how Evelyn is quite reminiscent of, say, like Marilyn Monroe, right? She's a very sexualized woman. We see her treated as an object throughout the story. And the weird thing is that Evelyn knows that. She accepts it, she knows it, and she also utilizes that in her favor. It's really interesting because, you know, we chart her journey from when she's young, she's in her like mid to late teens, and then by the end of the book, she's in her 60s or her 70s, if I remember correctly. And the thing that we realize as the reader, and the thing that she realizes as she tells the story, is that as she matured and as she got older, that's no longer what she wanted. She accepted it to a point, but by the end of the book, you can tell that she no longer wanted to be like that. And even though she accepted it, and even though she utilized that in her favor sometimes, she did that out of necessity more than anything else. It wasn't a choice. I think that's one thing about Evelyn that I really like, is that everything she does is out of necessity. Or that's how she feels like it is. I mean, to the reader and to the other characters in the story, not necessarily. But I do really believe that a lot of the stuff that she has to do, like 99% of the stuff that she does, is because she had to do it to survive. You get this insight into the Hollywood industry about like how cutthroat it is and how women in particular, you know, they have a sell-by date. And you see Evelyn struggle through with this as well. And that's why she is willing to go to lengths that most other people aren't, because it's that inevitable idea of like, you know, when you're at your peak and you have everything that you could possibly have, you have much more to lose. And she knows that. She's smart. She's a smart woman. And she knows that. And so the only way that she can really stay relevant is by doing the things that other people might not necessarily be willing to do or might look down upon. The other thematic piece is around like power dynamics. I mean, Hollywood has its lion's share of issues, especially with the whole Me Too movement over the last couple of years. And we are seeing Evelyn be quite powerless in a lot of situations, but then there are certain situations where she has a lot of power. And I really like those moments where she realizes that she has power and she has leverage, and she utilizes that in whatever way she utilizes it in that situation. And it's really satisfying to read that as a minority, not just a woman, but also as a minority, to see somebody who is so disadvantaged against the other people who are operating in the space, and yet utilize what she knows she can do against those people and in her favor. I love it. And even though I do feel kind of confused about her character sometimes in terms of some of the stuff that she does, I can't help but cheer for her, because I'm like, yes, you did what you needed to do. You took the power back, and more power to you for doing that. And I love that. I love that theme. Very big theme throughout this book. There were many times where I was like cheering in my head for her, even though maybe what she was doing was morally reprehensible. I was still cheering for her because I was like, yes, you're taking the power back. You're showing them who's boss. And I love it when characters do that. The last thing that I will mention on her character, there's so many things to talk about Evelyn and her character and the themes. The other like theme that kind of carries throughout this book is around like Evelyn herself as a person versus Evelyn as an institution. You know, the title of this book is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So we go through the story learning about the 7 husbands that she had. And it's really interesting that the story is even told in that way, because the husbands are defining moments of her career, of her life. That in itself is a really interesting concept, that the way that her story is told through men. It's told through these other men in her life. And Evelyn is very rarely seen as a person. She's very rarely seen as a human. She is seen as Evelyn, as this institution, as this person. I mean, like I said, it really reminds me of like Marilyn Monroe, right? Like people objectified her in such an awful way that they forgot that she was a human. They forgot that she was a person who had emotions and feelings and insecurities. I remember seeing kind of press clippings of what they used to say about her, and it's disgusting. And Evelyn goes through the same thing, and it really brings into this light of this whole like idea of celebrity culture. I personally hate celebrity culture. I detest it with a passion. I think it's disgusting. I hate the fact that we put people on a pedestal just because of the job that they do. I really hate it. Like, I really, really, really detest it. This book is a really good insight into that because it shows how we deify people. And that to me is just a really foreign idea. It's so odd to me that we deify other human beings. Evelyn herself, she's put on this insane trajectory. And because of that insane trajectory, people look at her in a way that isn't humane. They removed the dynamic of her being an actual human being, and it's really sad to read. It makes me think about like celebrity culture today and how it's arguably at its height because of things like social media. And I can't help but feel a little bit disgusted by it because you see the human cost of her being this object, of her being this institution, and the human cost is her. It's her sanity, it's her identity, it's her relationships with other people. The question that we have to ask ourselves, and this is the last point that I'm going to make on Evelyn, is it ever really worth it? And does Evelyn herself think it's ever really worth it? It's interesting because I was having a chat with Angela about this after I finished reading it, and you can definitely make arguments for both. You can definitely argue at the end of the book that feels like maybe it wasn't worth it because of the fact that it cost her certain relationships. She lost a lot of time that she could have spent with people that she truly loved. But then the flip side of that is it brought her money, it brought her wealth, it brought her recognition. To an extent, it brought her power. But at the end, she had a lot of power, so it brought her power. It's just such a conflicting thing. I mean, I personally, you know, I'm a private person anyway, and I'm not a celebrity. If I ever lost part of my identity, I think that would probably undo me. Like, so the fact that somebody who has their life so much publicized, so much on show, and the fact that you are always putting on an act, that to me is just, I don't think anything is worth that. I don't think anything is worth losing your own personal identity over, definitely losing your anonymity over, and losing that joy of experiencing life for yourself. Because I feel like Evelyn experiences life a lot on behalf of other people and not because that's what she wants to do. And so a lot of her choice, even though she has power, a lot of her choice is actually removed away from her. And that's what I was saying earlier about her having to do a lot of the things out of necessity rather than through choice. The other characters that I really liked, just quickly, that I will mention, I really enjoyed Harry's character. Harry's kind of like her best friend, and their relationship is one of the purest relationships in the story. It is probably the most pure relationship in the book. They accept each other for who they are. They respect each other. They're partners in crime. And they are soulmates, but not in the romantic sense. They are best friends. They would do anything for each other. And I love that sort of relationship because those are some of my favorite relationships that I have in my own life, is those kind of platonic friendships, but they're with people that are kind of like soulmates. And it just feels so special. And I really love their journey together. The other character that I will also mention is her relationship with Celia. I'm not going to go into this one too much because that relationship is an arc that you should experience for yourself. I didn't really know where it was going to go at the start. Really loved their journey together. Their story is a really good example of how society often tries to pit women against each other, and yet you have these two incredibly strong, beautiful, intelligent, ambitious women who are eventually able to put their differences aside and really form this beautiful relationship that I loved reading. The other thing that I really, I've talked about characters a lot because it's a very character-driven book, right? There's no plot. You're just charting the rise and fall of this main person. But there is this kind of undertone of this mystery, you know. Monique, the journalist that I mentioned at the start, she is not a very well-known writer, and so there's this question that we have hanging over the story as to why Evelyn picked her to write the story, because she specifically asks for her. There is this mystery element underlining the story that I really enjoyed, and I did predict it, but the way that the reveal was told at the end of the story was really beautiful, and I thought it was really satisfying, and I really liked the dynamic between Monique and Evelyn, especially as a result of that reveal. There's one thing I will mention. This story is very sad. It's not, yes, there are highlights, but it's not for the faint-hearted for sure. Like, if you don't want to be depressed by the end of it, don't read it, because it is a depressing book. I messaged Angela afterwards and I was like, I need to go watch some cartoons now because I just feel really sad. You definitely do. It's depressing, but you take a lot from it. As you can tell, I took a lot from the character and just from a lot from the themes. The last thing I'll mention, because this video is going on quite a bit longer than I anticipated. And I didn't even get to some of the stuff that I wanted to chat about, but there you go. Well, I think the pacing is fantastic. There were a few moments where I felt like the pacing was a little bit off. I think that's just me maybe being a little bit fussy, because generally, you know, as I said, I read it in a couple of days and I read through it very quickly. The story does progress very well in general. There's maybe just one or two areas where I would have liked the pacing to maybe have maintained a little bit more consistent, but it's a fairly minor gripe. I'm going to stop it there because I feel like I talked a lot about the character and the themes, and that's because this book is a very character-driven, thematic-driven book. I loved it. It was such a pleasant surprise. In terms of my rating, I first gave this book, when I finished it, a 4.25/a 4.5. But now that I've reflected on it and I'm still thinking about this story, I decided to give it a 4.75. It's a really strong story. If you're looking for something that is a little bit different from what you normally read, especially if you're a fantasy reader, I strongly recommend it. If you're somebody who likes contemporary fiction anyway, then I also strongly recommend it. It's fantastic. Really strong book. I really do think this book would do well as an adaptation, either as a limited series or a movie. It's just one of those books that is just being begged to be watched. I do believe someone has bought the rights, but I really hope they use undercover actors and they actually use an actor to play Evelyn who is of Latino heritage, and I'll be really annoyed if they don't. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you've read this book, because in my circle of friends, not many people read contemporary fiction. I mean, Angela does now and then, and some of my other friends do occasionally as well. But if you are somebody who has read this book and you love this book as much as I did, please let me know. 4.75 is really solid. I might even end up giving it a 5 eventually if I'm still thinking about it in the way that I think about it. I also think this is a good book to reread, especially if you are a woman or you're a minority. And I think you as a reader would be able to take different things from it each time you read it. And so this is definitely a book that I plan to reread maybe in a couple of years once I've advanced more in my own life. So there we go. I'm going to leave it there. And let's chat below about this book, because it's so fantastic. And there's just so much about this book that makes it an incredibly rich story. And I loved it. I will chat to you down below. As always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And I will see you in the next one. Stay safe, everybody. Take care. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye, folks.